I sat at the corner table of Bellissimo, the most exclusive restaurant in town, watching my Aunt Susan's 70th birthday celebration unfold. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the marble tables as waiters in crisp uniforms circulated with champagne. When my cousin Jake spotted me, his face twisted into a smirk. "Mark, this table is for family. You can find a spot outside," he laughed as the others grinned. The waiter dropped a $3,000 bill in front of me. I took a sip of my coffee and chuckled. They had no idea who was covering it tonight. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had family members who thought they were better than you. Trust me, you'll want to see how this one ends. My relationship with Aunt Susan's family was complicated from the beginning. Growing up, I was always the poor relative, the son of Susan's troubled younger sister, who had disappointed the family by marrying my father, a construction worker, with no college education. My mother was considered the black sheep of their prestigious family, having chosen love over their expectations of marrying into wealth. Jake and my other cousins never let me forget my place in the family hierarchy. They lived in a mansion in the suburbs with private school educations and European vacations, while I shared a small apartment with my parents in a working-class neighborhood. During the rare family gatherings we were invited to, Jake would accidentally spill drinks on my clothes or make jokes about our quaint lifestyle. His siblings, Thomas and Amanda, would laugh along, forming a united front against the outsider. When I was 12, my world shattered completely. My parents died in a car accident on their way home from their anniversary dinner. With no other close relatives, I was sent to live with Aunt Susan and her husband, Uncle James. While most people would expect compassion for an orphaned child, what I received was closer to tolerance than love. Aunt Susan treated me like an unwanted obligation. I was given the smallest bedroom in their 5-bedroom house, essentially a converted storage room next to the laundry. While my cousins received new clothes and the latest gadgets, I wore hand-me-downs and used outdated electronics they no longer wanted. During dinner parties, I was expected to help the household staff rather than join the family at the table. The only person who showed me genuine kindness was Uncle James. Unlike the rest of the family, he came from humble beginnings himself, having built his real estate empire from scratch. When no one was looking, he would check on me, ask about my schoolwork, and occasionally slip me books about business and investing. "Calvin," he told me once while we sat in his study away from the judgmental eyes of the others, "people will always try to define you by your circumstances or your past. The secret is to never let them. Your worth is determined by your character and your actions, not your bank account or your last name." Those late-night conversations with Uncle James became my sanctuary. While the rest of the family saw me as a burden, he saw potential. He taught me about real estate finance and the importance of integrity in business. "Anyone can make money, Calvin, but not everyone can earn respect," he would say. "Focus on building both." When I turned 16, Uncle James started taking me to property viewings and investment meetings on weekends. Aunt Susan disapproved, thinking it was a waste of time, but Uncle James insisted I learn the business. Jake and my other cousins were jealous of the attention I received, spreading rumors that I was manipulating their father for money. 2 years later, just as I was preparing for college, Uncle James suffered a massive heart attack. The doctors said it was instant. He felt no pain, but I felt everything crumble around me. I had lost my mentor, my protector, and the only person in that house who believed in me. After the funeral, the family gathered for the reading of the will. As expected, Aunt Susan received most of the estate, with Jake and my other cousins getting substantial trust funds and shares in the family business. I sat in the back of the room expecting nothing. To my surprise, the lawyer called my name. "To Calvin, I leave the sum of $50,000, and a sealed letter," the lawyer read from the will. Jake snickered from across the room. "That will barely cover a semester at a decent college," he whispered loudly enough for me to hear. The sealed letter contained a short message. "Calvin, this is not your inheritance. This is your seed money. I have always believed you have what it takes to build something greater than what I am leaving behind. Honor me not by preserving what I built, but by creating something new. Remember our talks." That night, I packed my belongings, which fit into a single suitcase, and left the house without saying goodbye. With Uncle James gone, there was nothing keeping me there. I had my seed money, my education, and most importantly, the knowledge Uncle James had shared with me. It was time to forge my own path. The first few years on my own were brutal. I rented a tiny studio apartment and enrolled in business courses at the state university while working two jobs to stretch Uncle James's money as far as possible. During the day, I worked as an administrative assistant at a small real estate firm. At night, I waited tables at a downtown restaurant. Between shifts, I attended classes and studied until my eyes burned from exhaustion. Every dollar I saved went into my investment fund. I remembered Uncle James's advice. Start small, but think big. My first investment was a rundown duplex in an up-and-coming neighborhood. The property needed significant repairs, which I handled myself on weekends, learning plumbing and basic carpentry from YouTube videos and library books. 6 months after purchasing the duplex, I had renovated both units and found reliable tenants. The rental income covered my mortgage with a small profit margin that I reinvested immediately. This became my pattern: work, study, invest, repeat. I lived frugally, never spending on luxuries, focusing entirely on building my portfolio one property at a time. In my second year of college, I received an unexpected call from Anthony Reynolds, a name I recognized from Uncle James's business meetings. Anthony had been my uncle's business partner in several ventures and had apparently been keeping tabs on me. "Your uncle asked me to check in on you after a couple of years," Anthony explained when we met for coffee. "He wanted to give you space to find your own way first, but he also wanted to make sure you had guidance if you needed it." Anthony became my new mentor, providing advice and occasionally opening doors to opportunities I wouldn't have accessed otherwise. He shared stories about Uncle James that the family never knew, including how my uncle had always believed I would surpass Jake and the others in business acumen. "James saw himself in you," Anthony told me. "Not because you were both underdogs, but because you both understood the value of work and integrity. The others were born into privilege and never learned its cost." By my third year of college, I owned 4 properties and had established Calvin Morgan Investments as a legitimate, if small, business entity. I was still working both jobs and attending classes, but now I had a clear vision of my future. Then came the opportunity that would change everything. Anthony informed me about a commercial property development in the downtown area. The initial investment required was substantial, more than everything I had saved. It was a major risk that would deplete all my resources. After weeks of research and sleepless nights weighing my options, I decided to take the plunge. I liquidated my assets, took out a loan using my properties as collateral, and invested everything into the development project. For months, I lived with constant anxiety, knowing I had bet everything on this single venture. The development was completed 6 months ahead of schedule and under budget. Within a year, the property value had tripled, and the commercial spaces were fully leased with a waiting list. My risk had paid off spectacularly, allowing me to repay my loans and expand my business faster than I had ever imagined. Over the next decade, Calvin Morgan Investments grew from a one-man operation to a respected firm with offices in 3 states. I specialized in revitalizing neglected neighborhoods, turning abandoned buildings into affordable housing and community spaces while still generating healthy profits. Each success built upon the last, and by my early 30s, I had accumulated more wealth than I had ever dreamed possible. Despite my success, I maintained a low profile. I rarely attended industry events, declined interviews with business publications, and kept my personal life private. My employees knew me as demanding but fair, someone who valued hard work and innovation. What they did not know was my background or the family I had left behind. In all those years, I had no contact with Aunt Susan or my cousins. Occasionally, I would hear news through Anthony about Jake taking over the family business after college and making a series of increasingly risky investments. I felt no satisfaction when Anthony mentioned that the family company was struggling under Jake's leadership. Uncle James's legacy deserved better. Then, 10 years after leaving that house, a gold-embossed envelope arrived at my office. Inside was an invitation to Aunt Susan's 70th birthday celebration at Bellissimo. Ironically, a restaurant I had purchased 3 years earlier during my expansion into hospitality. The invitation was surprising enough, but the handwritten note from Aunt Susan was even more unexpected. "Calvin, it would mean a great deal to have you there. Family should be together for important occasions." I wondered what had prompted this sudden desire for family reunion after a decade of silence. A quick call to Anthony confirmed my suspicions the family business was on the verge of bankruptcy. Jake's risky investments had backfired spectacularly, and they had accumulated substantial debt trying to keep the company afloat. What Aunt Susan and the others did not know was that I had been quietly purchasing their debt through one of my subsidiary companies. It was not out of vindictiveness, but to protect Uncle James's legacy from being dismantled by creditors. I had no intention of calling in those debts, but I had effectively become their largest creditor without their knowledge. After days of deliberation, I decided to attend the birthday celebration, not to gloat or seek revenge, but to understand the situation fully and perhaps find a way to honor Uncle James's memory by helping the family he loved, despite their flaws. The night of Aunt Susan's birthday, I arrived at Bellissimo an hour early. The restaurant manager, Michael, greeted me with the deference due to the owner, but I asked him to treat me as a regular guest for the evening. "Your table is ready, Mr. Morgan," Michael said. "And regarding the other arrangements, everything as discussed," I confirmed. "No special treatment and no mention of my ownership. Just make sure the service is impeccable for everyone." I chose a corner table with a good view of the main dining area where the family celebration would take place. As I sipped my coffee, I watched the staff prepare the large round table in the center of the restaurant with elegant place settings and floral arrangements. At precisely 7, Aunt Susan arrived with Jake and his wife, Stephanie. They were followed by Thomas and his husband, Daniel, and Amanda with her 2 teenage children. Aunt Susan looked older than her 70 years, with deep lines of worry etched into her face despite her expensive outfit and jewelry. They settled at their table without noticing me in the corner. I observed their interactions, noting the tension beneath the celebratory facade. Their conversation was punctuated by forced laughter and quick, worried glances when Aunt Susan wasn't looking. They ordered the most expensive wines and appetizers, with a carelessness that suggested they were putting on a show. After their second round of drinks, Jake spotted me. He stared for a moment, clearly surprised, before leaning over to whisper something to Thomas. Both of them looked in my direction with undisguised hostility. Aunt Susan followed their gaze and upon seeing me gave a small, uncertain wave. I stood and walked to their table, a gift box in hand. "Happy birthday, Aunt Susan," I said, placing the small package before her. There was an awkward silence as everyone stared at me. I had changed significantly in 10 years, growing from the insecure boy they remembered into a confident man. I was dressed well but modestly in a tailored suit that displayed none of the flashiness Jake favored with his gold watch and designer labels. "Calvin," Aunt Susan finally said, "I was not sure you would come. Thank you for joining us." Before I could respond, Jake interrupted. "Well, well, if it is not our long-lost cousin. What brings you back after all this time? Finally realized what you are missing." "I received an invitation," I replied simply. "It seemed important to Aunt Susan." Jake snorted. "So now you care about family. Where were you when Mom needed help with the business these past few years?" "I was not aware I was needed," I said, maintaining my composure. "No one reached out until now." Amanda, always the most diplomatic of my cousins, gestured to an empty chair. "Why do not you join us, Calvin? We can catch up." Jake's face darkened. "Actually, this table is reserved for family. The real family, not someone who abandoned us for a decade." Aunt Susan protested weakly, but she did not insist I stay. Jake stood up, towering over me with the same intimidating posture he had used when we were children. His voice carried across the restaurant as he proclaimed, "Mark, this table is for family. You can find a spot outside." He used the nickname he had given me years ago to mock my status as an outsider. The others at the table looked uncomfortable, but remained silent, complicit in my exclusion. Thomas and Amanda exchanged glances but said nothing in my defense. The teenage children watched with wide eyes, learning the family tradition of cruelty. "I understand," I said quietly. "Enjoy your evening." As I turned to walk back to my corner table, Jake called after me. "By the way, how is life treating you? Still managing apartment buildings or whatever small-time operation you were running?" I did not respond, simply returning to my seat and signaling to Michael for another coffee. From my vantage point, I could see the family resume their celebration, Jake animatedly telling a story that made the others laugh. Occasionally, one of them would glance in my direction with a mixture of curiosity and dismissal. The evening progressed with multiple courses and bottles of wine. I remained in my corner observing as their forced gaiety became more genuine with each glass. When the time came for dessert, Michael approached their table with a special cake I had arranged, topped with sparklers and gold leaf. The restaurant staff gathered to sing happy birthday to Aunt Susan, who blushed with pleasure at the attention. As the celebration wound down, Jake signaled for the check, his movements confident and entitled. Michael arrived with a leather folder containing the bill and placed it discreetly next to Jake. I watched as Jake opened it, his expression shifting from satisfaction to shock as he registered the total $3,000 for the evening's extravagance. Jake frantically whispered to Thomas, who looked equally alarmed as he examined the bill. Aunt Susan noticed their distress and leaned over to see what was wrong. Her face paled as she realized the cost of their evening. I knew from Anthony that the family business had been struggling to make payroll for months. A $3,000 dinner bill would be a significant strain on their finances, yet they had ordered without restraint, assuming they could manage the cost. Michael approached my table. "Is everything satisfactory, sir?" he asked loud enough for the family to hear. "Perfect as always, Michael," I replied, matching his volume. "The new menu items are excellent." Jake's head whipped around at the familiar way Michael addressed me. His eyes narrowed as he observed our interaction, suspicion dawning on his face. I took a final sip of my coffee and chuckled softly to myself. They had no idea who would be covering the bill tonight, or how much more than $3,000 was at stake in our reunion. Jake stared at the bill, then back at me, his face flushing with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. I could see him calculating whether they could afford to pay or if they should try to negotiate a payment plan. Aunt Susan's hands trembled slightly as she opened her purse, likely knowing there was not enough in their accounts to cover such an extravagant expense. I stood and walked calmly to their table, nodding to Michael as I passed. "Is there a problem with the bill?" I asked, though I knew exactly what the issue was. Jake glared at me. "Nothing we cannot handle," he snapped, but the strain in his voice betrayed him. "Allow me," I said, reaching for the leather folder. Thomas laughed harshly. "Right, because you can afford a $3,000 dinner bill." Instead of responding, I removed a black card from my wallet and placed it in the folder. "Michael, please add a 30% gratuity for the staff," I said. "The service was exceptional tonight." A heavy silence fell over the table as the implications of my actions sank in. Jake's expression shifted from dismissive to calculating. "You must be doing better than I thought," he said, attempting to sound casual. "What exactly do you do these days?" Michael returned promptly with the receipt for me to sign. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan. The team always appreciates your generosity, Mr. Morgan." Amanda repeated, her eyes widening. I signed the receipt and handed it back to Michael. "Thank you. And please remind the kitchen staff about our meeting tomorrow regarding the new seasonal menu." As Michael left, I turned to face my family, who were now staring at me with undisguised shock. To answer your question, Jake, I own Bellissimo and about 30 other restaurants across the country, along with several hotel chains and real estate developments. "That is impossible," Jake spluttered. "You left with nothing." "I left with $50,000, and Uncle James's wisdom," I corrected him, "which turned out to be worth far more than you might have imagined." Aunt Susan's hand covered her mouth. "Calvin High had no idea." "Few people do," I replied. "I prefer to keep a low profile." Jake's expression hardened as he processed this information. "So you came back to rub your success in our faces, to show us how well you have done without us." I shook my head. "I came because I was invited, and because I was concerned about the family business." "What do you know about our business?" Thomas demanded. "I know it is on the verge of bankruptcy," I said quietly. "I know you have leveraged most of your personal assets trying to keep it afloat. And I know that next week your largest creditor is planning to call in their loans." Jake's face drained of color. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I am that creditor," I revealed. "Or rather, one of my investment firms, Island. We purchased your debt 6 months ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Amanda was the first to recover. "Are you going to destroy us?" she asked directly. I looked around the table at each of them. These people who had once been my family, who had excluded and belittled me for years. I saw fear in their eyes, the same fear I had felt as a child, never knowing if I would be accepted or rejected. But beneath that fear, I also saw Uncle James's features in Aunt Susan's face and glimpses of the children Jake and the others had once been. No, I said finally. I am going to offer you a way forward. I explained my proposal. I would restructure their debt and inject capital into the company, but with conditions. Jake and Thomas would step down from management positions replaced by qualified professionals. The family would retain ownership shares, but would no longer control day-to-day operations. Most importantly, they would need to acknowledge the damage their mismanagement had caused to Uncle James's legacy and commit to honoring his business principles moving forward. Why would you help us after how we treated you? Aunt Susan asked, tears forming in her eyes. Because Uncle James would have wanted his company saved, I answered honestly. And because holding on to resentment only limits my own happiness. I learned that from him too. Jake struggled visibly with his pride. So we would still own the company, but not run it. You would own a profitable company instead of a bankrupt one, I clarified. And you would learn from professionals how to become the kind of leaders Uncle James hoped you would be. Aunt Susan reached across the table and took my hand. Calvin, I failed you when you needed family most. We all did. I do not expect forgiveness, but I am truly sorry. Her sincerity surprised me. In all the years I had lived in her house, she had never apologized for anything. I forgive you, I said, realizing as the words left my mouth that I truly meant them. Uncle James always said that family is not about who shares your blood, but who shares your values. Maybe it is time we tried to become a real family. Thomas, always more reflective than Jake, spoke up. I was jealous of the attention my father gave you. I never understood why he spent so much time teaching you instead of us. Now I see he recognized something in you that we lacked. He tried to teach all of us, I reminded him. But you have to be willing to learn. As the evening drew to a close, we agreed to meet the following week, with our respective legal teams to formalize the arrangement. The atmosphere had transformed from hostile to cautiously hopeful. Even Jake, after his initial resistance, seemed to recognize the opportunity I was offering. While the others gathered their belongings, Aunt Susan remained seated. The real reason I invited you tonight, she confessed quietly, was because I found a letter James wrote to me before he died. He asked me to look after you as if you were our own son. I failed him in that, and I failed you. When I realized how badly the business was doing, I finally understood the magnitude of my failure. I thought it was too late to make amends. It is never too late to rebuild, I told her, thinking of all the abandoned properties I had transformed over the years. That is one business lesson that applies equally to buildings and relationships. In the months that followed, I worked closely with the family to restructure the business. Jake initially resisted the changes, but eventually embraced the opportunity to learn from the executives I brought in. Thomas discovered a talent for creative direction that had been stifled by his previous role. Amanda, who had always been kept on the periphery, revealed an aptitude for client relations. I did not expect us to become a perfect family overnight, and we were not. There were disagreements and occasional flare-ups of old resentments. But slowly we established a new foundation, built on mutual respect, rather than obligation or hierarchy. The greatest transformation was in my relationship with Aunt Susan. As we worked together to honor Uncle James's legacy, she shared stories about my mother that I had never heard, helping me connect with the parents I had lost. In return, I helped her understand the business her husband had built, something she had always been adjacent to but never fully engaged with. 1 year after that fateful birthday dinner, we gathered again at Bellissimo, this time with no pretense or exclusion. As I looked around the table at my family, I realized that the true measure of success was not in my financial achievements or even in saving the family business. It was in finding the strength to offer forgiveness instead of seeking revenge, and in creating a family defined by mutual respect rather than shared DNA. The greatest wealth Uncle James left me was not his seed money or his business knowledge, but his understanding that true prosperity comes from building something meaningful and treating people with dignity. In honoring that lesson, I had not only created financial wealth, but also the richer treasure of genuine human connection. Have you ever had to choose between revenge and reconciliation with family members who hurt you? Let me know in the comments how you handled it. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that forgiveness can be a gift you give yourself. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the family table you belong at is the one you build yourself.